if you sit around in your house and you wait for somebody to come and knock on your door and say, "Hey, I've been looking for somebody to help me, build my website," or whatever it is that you do, like, that's not gonna happen. Like, you gotta be vocal about it. You gotta go
Mhm.
and tell people, you gotta run ads, you gotta open your mouth and talk about it. And so if you're gonna bring somebody onto your podcast and you don't tell them what you do, you're going to have to rely on them asking you, which may happen, but most likely they're just going to be thinking about themselves. They're living in their own world. So you got to make yourself known. And that's what the anchor offer really is. Not only am I making myself known, this is what I do, but Joel will get into this a little bit more specifically. I'm going to craft that offer in a way to where you cannot ignore this because it is so specifically about you that you have to pay attention. You have to ask me about it.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Joel Erway here, and I've got Josh Thomas, and we have something very special that we wanted to bring to our audience, our collective audiences here today. And it's along the lines of lead generation, power offers, and using a new methodology called Conversion Podcast that Josh has coined and had a lot of success with. Now, a little bit of context of why the two of us have gotten together. Both of us have purchased each other's products. Both of us have used each other's methodologies. And I don't even want to say overlap, but there's commingling that happens when you understand the power of a power offer or a really compelling offer and then apply it to other strategies. And that's really what Josh has mastered with his conversion style podcast. So we started chatting back and forth. I pinged him or he pinged me. I can't remember, but I bought his program a couple of months ago. It was fantastic. And he's purchased my program as well. So we had a conversation. It was like, hey, let's jam about this because I think people will find a lot of value with how to marry the two of these and really how to just think through the eyes of lead generation in a different lens. So, Josh, what's up, my man?
Hey, man, I'm super happy to be here. And I think that's a great frame because you can take the conversion podcast and swap it out with ads. You can swap it out with a social media post. You can swap it out with an email. The idea here is we want to expand the idea of what's possible with a power offer or a really good, strong, compelling offer that appeals to your ideal audience that solves a specific problem of theirs. And so we're going to talk about the conversion podcast today, but I want you to understand that the main reason we're doing this is you can put this in any medium and it will work. And if you have the right offer for the right audience, the medium really doesn't even matter.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of your other stuff doesn't even matter, like how shiny your webpage is, how tricked out your copy is, how well produced your video is. It's all about the offer. 90% of the success of a conversion podcast comes down to how strong your offer is, just like any other method possible.
So what really attracted me to the conversion style podcast, and we'll explain what it is in just a second, because if you're listening right now, you have no idea what it is, you're probably still left in the dark with what the heck is a conversion style or a conversion podcast. What really attracted me to it and kind of made the light bulb moment go off for me, and this is the link to really what a power offer can do, is, I have over 7,000 students who've gone through the power offer training, and in its simplistic form, it's a one sentence script that gets people to say, hey, like after you share this script, anywhere that you want, literally anywhere you want, ads, emails, organic, social, podcast, anywhere that you share this script, it should generate a response. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to whip out their credit card and buy, but it should say, the response should be at least, hey, tell me more, or hey, I'm interested. And the number one question that I get when people go through it, I primarily focus on ads and organic, but my customers might look through the lens of like, oh, well, I don't have an audience, or, I don't want to run ads. And so they get very, they put up their own limiting beliefs. The reality is I tell them, I said, you can use this anywhere. Like I've got people that use these in magazine ads, magazine publications. And what's really cool is Josh is going to show you how to use this power offer. He calls it an anchor offer, but it's the same thing. How to use this power offer at the front end of a conversion style podcast to get leads and get clients, even if you have zero audience. So that's kind of the big idea here that we're talking about, is merging these two and understanding how to strategically place these power offers anywhere that you are doing. And by the end of this little mini training, I want you to say, wow, I understand now how to do this with a conversion style podcast, but now expand your brain and get creative with it. Like, where else could you do this? Because this is a unique way that I haven't seen, and it worked. I did it. I'm 1 for 1. So I had a conversion style podcast that I hosted about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I used this framework, and by the end of it, it turned into a consulting agreement and turned into a promotional partner. That's the power of what we can do here. So Josh, why don't you give us an idea of what a conversion podcast is and how it's different from a traditional podcast?
So I just want to put on record, Joel Erway has a 100% success rate with my conversion podcast. Let's put that out there. Yeah. So look, here's the thing, the quick history lesson. I've been running podcasts for 9 years, since 2016. And when I started it, the person who helped me start it, he said one thing that really changed the trajectory and the perspective of what a podcast really is. He said, don't focus on building a relationship with your audience. Focus on building a relationship with your guest, because that's the most valuable relationship you can have. And now that I've recorded over 1,200 episodes, I can say that's 100% true, because when I have a guest in front of me, I can see their facial expressions. I can navigate that conversation. It's interactive. However many people are listening to this podcast, I have no control over it. I don't know who they are. They're behind a white sheet. If we're on stage, there's a big white sheet that's blocking me from the audience. And if they're asking me questions, I can't hear them. But I can see everything, even like a raised eyebrow from my guest. And so I focus on the relationship with the guest. That's first and foremost. If I'm going to do business from a podcast, it's going to be with my guest in some form or fashion. The first thing that comes up, we'll get into the meat in a moment, but one common gut reaction that comes up is, oh, okay, so you bring somebody on the podcast to try to sell them something. That sounds like bait and switch. And you're right, it does sound like bait and switch, because I hear it a lot. But that's why we set it up in a way that it turns into a sales conversation completely naturally, in a way that's authentic. It is streamlined. It is structured for that to happen, but it's not forced. There are lots of people that are out there doing a podcast and trying to flip somebody into a sale, and they're missing a couple of steps, and it just kind of feels like slimy.
Yeah.
The way we're going to show you how to do this is not slimy. It's actually very authentic. It's very natural. Nobody feels like they're being sold or swapped out. I've had 0 complaints about that after over 1,000 episodes recorded. And so there's no issue there. And Joel, when you were going through your process with your client, how did it feel for you, and how did it feel for the client on the back end?
Yeah. So in reality, it just felt like an ad read, and I have never run any ads on my pod. So full transparency, I have 2 podcasts that I've been running since 2017 and 2018. I will call them traditional podcasts, right? I've recorded, I think, 300 episodes across the two of them, probably like 180 on one, 120 on the other. And they're your standard, typical podcasts. I've kind of heard of something similar to this in the past. I've also been a guest on other podcasts where I feel like I've gone through a similar process, and I certainly had my guard up, like as I entered this, like when I joined your program, I bought your program. I don't want to say I had my guard up, but I'm like, all right, I want to see how this is. I want to see the right way to do it, is really what I wanted to know. It's like, what's the right way to do this? Because I didn't want it to feel bait and switch. So when I did it, it was effortless, it was natural, and I never brought up the sale once. By the end of it, they had said, hey, tell me a little bit more about what you do. And that was it. Like, and then like now it became, oh, okay, cool. Here's what I do. And then it turned into a partnership and a consulting agreement.
Awesome. And that's really the power of this is, when I call it the anchor offer, we are anchoring this at the very beginning of the conversation. And we'll dive into what an offer really needs to look like, because that's what this entire session is about, is getting a great offer. but we anchor the offer at the very beginning because most people who have heard a podcast that has a sponsor, they're used to hearing the host read that sponsor ad out loud. They're used to that. Anybody with a Netflix subscription that doesn't get like the super bougie upgrade, you're going to get your movie interrupted by a Tide commercial or something stupid. Like we're used to that. Anybody who's ever watched TV, every 5 minutes, there's a 2-minute commercial break.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody gets like offended. They're like, oh my God, I was trying to watch my show. Like they understand this is how we pay the bills. And so we're just going to drop that right at the beginning. And we'll get into the psychology of it in a minute, but we're going to drop it at the beginning and we're going to move on. We're going to leave it there. This is what I do. This is how it helps you. This is why you should pay attention. Anyway, today's guest is Bob Smith, and he's going to tell us about blah, 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 whatever.
Yep.
And then you spend the next however long your podcast is. I like to keep mine tight. Mine are usually about 12 minutes or less. We're going to just build rapport. We're going to establish a know, like, and trust, and we're going to shine a spotlight on the guest to make them feel good and seen and acknowledged and important. And then we'll remind them one more time at the end as we're closing out. By the way, if you want help with XYZ, go to abc.com. That'll do it for this episode. You hit stop, you're in post.
And just to pause, those front and end little ad reels, those are your anchor offers. Those are your power offers, right? They're structured to raise interest, awareness, desire for your offer. And whether or not ideally your guest is a target client, a target customer. And so you're indirectly presenting the offer to them. And if it's of interest, then hopefully by the end of that conversation, they ask you a question like, hey, tell me about what you were talking there about on the podcast or whatever. So I just wanted to be clear. That's the conversion podcast. That's the structure, the framework.
That's right. And the thing about it is if you sit around in your house and you wait for somebody to come and knock on your door and say, hey, I've been looking for somebody to help me, build my website or whatever it is that you do, like that's not going to happen. Like you got to be vocal about it. You got to go and tell people, you got to run ads, you got to open your mouth and talk about it. And so if you're going to bring somebody onto your podcast, and you don't tell them what you do, you're going to have to rely on them asking you, which may happen, but most likely they're just going to be thinking about themselves. They're living in their own world. So you got to make yourself known. And that's what the anchor offer really is. Not only am I making myself known, this is what I do, but Joel will get into this a little bit more specifically. I'm going to craft that offer in a way to where you cannot ignore this because it is so specifically about you that you have to pay attention. You have to ask me about it. But here's the thing. The guest is making that decision, not you. You're not cornering them into a hole. You're just creating the ideal environment, the perfect conditions for them to say, hey, I might be interested in doing business with you. Can you tell me more? And then at that point, all you're really doing is you're entering your basic discovery process. Well, yeah, sure. I'm happy to tell you about that. Would you mind if I just ask you a few questions to see like if it even makes sense? And then you're into your discovery process and you just follow your whatever sales methodology that you have at that point and take it to the end.
The one thing that I wanted to make sure I did during the conversion podcast was, I know you follow a 12-minute structure. And to me, because like there are right ways and wrong ways to do it. Like I had been invited on, so as someone who's been invited on probably 100 summits, podcasts, interviews, probably even more than that over the past like 12 years, you get kind of guarded with some of the requests. It's not that I don't want to help anyone regardless of the audience size, but there have been many interviews that I've done. I mean, not like many, but like enough to annoy me where they've either not gone live or they were clearly trying to position me as the customer. It's like I was the target client, I was the target customer. And the couple of times that I did feel that experience is when they were like hyper focused, hyper short, like a 10-minute or I don't know, like a 5-minute podcast. Like, hey, I've got 7 questions I'm going to ask you. And I'm like, why don't I just email you? Like that was my reaction. It's like, why don't I just email you the answers if you want to use it? It's like, no, let's hop on a podcast. I'm like, I don't know. So the way that I do it is I am still, they're probably 30 to 45 minutes long for me because I want to build a deeper relationship with my potential client or potential partner. And so I think that's the beauty about this is the actual podcast itself can be whatever framework that you want. And the conversion piece is what happens at the beginning and the end. Did I summarize that correctly? Or maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there is something that has to happen during the podcast that I missed.
No, you're exactly right. And here's the thing. The length actually doesn't matter. I keep them down to 12 minutes, mostly because I got a lot to do and I had a lot of opportunity to meet new people. And I used to run hour-long podcasts, and it would just eviscerate my day if I took everybody who wanted to be on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just challenged myself to do a 30-minute time slot, and I worked out the timing of, well, what would a podcast look like if I had 30 minutes instead of an hour? It came down to, if I script it and I keep it controlled and tight, you can actually build a real meaningful relationship in that amount of time, as long as you're super intentional about it. But it's not for everyone. So most people do an hour long, or some people do longer stuff. That's fine. The point is, as Joel's mentioning, the book ends. But the other thing that's happening in the middle, and I don't want this to be lost on anyone, is acknowledgement. And acknowledgement is a word that I use in any kind of sales training that I do. I have a small team that supports me and kind of talks to some of my customers and clients on my behalf. And it's one term that I share with them is like, if you're going to communicate with anybody on my behalf, the first thing that you must do always is you must acknowledge the person that you're talking to. And here's what we're doing on a podcast when we're acknowledging. When you're shining a spotlight on somebody who's talking about whatever topic it is that's interesting to them, because we're asking them, like, tell me why you're so great. Tell me a great story that's meaningful to you. Tell me something that you think that people should know. You're acknowledging their presence. You're acknowledging their expertise, their intelligence, their thought processes, their very existence. And here's the power of acknowledgement. You don't know what their home life is like. You don't know what it's like at their job or at their business. They may go home to a crappy relationship where their significant other never acknowledges them for anything. You sitting there and saying, Bob, tell me about why you're so awesome. Wow, that's a great insight, Bob. You saying that to your guest, that might be the only time they've ever heard that in their life, or at least this year or this month. That right there, that acknowledgement creates a deeper bond with you than almost anything else that you can do. Just basically saying, hey man, I see you. Because maybe nobody else has done that in a long time for them. If nothing else, just be a decent, genuine human being, and that will take you really far. Even if you don't have a great offer, sometimes that makes up for it, but do have a good offer. That's what we want to really dig into next is, I have my kind of methodology for coming up with an offer, but a lot of it's kind of based on what Joel taught me. And so, Joel, what are the components of a really solid offer that has the best chance of making everything else almost unnecessary?
Yeah. So with your what I call power offers, the core thing is being top of mind with something that people are actively searching for. Okay. And a lot of times this requires people to really dig deep, because we get married to, like, we think our product is our offer, and that's not true at all. We fall in love with our product. We try and sell our product. Hey, I've got this awesome gizmo. I've got this awesome program that will help you lose weight, or I've got this awesome program that will, cause you to fall in love with yourself, or cause you to attract the world's, transform the world's energy into your oyster. And it's like, oh boy, like, we got some work to do, right? And when people, but like, these are my people, like, product owners are my people. So I say this with all the love and respect in the world. Like, it's why every sort of training or coaching engagement or consulting engagement that I do, like, we start with this power offer, because your power offer is meant to trigger their dopamine. It's meant to appeal to what it is that they're actively searching for, and framing it in a way that we only want a binary response, which is, are you interested in this? Yes or no? Okay. So the framework that I have that I use for the power offer is, hey, attention, primary avatar. And if you are going to a direct group of people, you don't have to call it that attention, but I'm doing this in the framework of an ad. But it's simply, if I offered to help you get XYZ result without ABC obstacle, would you take me up on that offer? That's the power offer. And framing it like that allows people to have to say yes or no, right? And here's where the artistic piece comes in, because it doesn't always have to be a question, right? But that's been what's gotten a lot of people the most results, and it gets them to understand the purpose of a power offer and, an elevator pitch, other people might call it. But, if I offer to give you ABC benefit without XYZ obstacle, would you be interested? Would you take me up on that offer? Like, that is how you validate. That is how you generate a response from your target market on whether or not they're actually interested in whatever the heck it is that you have to offer. For example, the first power offer that I created, I targeted course creators to help them launch webinars, write webinars. I had been doing this for 5 years already, and I wanted to find another method of lead generation. And so we had just launched this brand new offer within the webinar space where we would create their offer in 24 hours, create their webinar outline in 24 hours or less, right? It wasn't going to be the full script, but we could outline the core components of their introduction, their content, their pitch, their offer, their FAQs in 24 hours or less. So I wrote a power offer for it. And I said, hey, attention course creators, if I offer to help you launch a high converting sales webinar in less than 24 hours, guaranteed to convert, without you needing to, so now I'm going into the objection piece, without you needing to write a single word or figure out what to say or how to say it, would you take me up on that offer? That was my first power offer. And that was really the genesis of understanding what I had just launched, because I launched that as an ad. I also launched it to my internal audience, and it crushed both ways. If you can simplify, not if you can, when you simplify it into that one single sentence, there's many ways to kind of massage that and reframe it. But if you follow what that sentence is doing, you will know whether or not your target market is interested in it. Because if you launch that as an ad or you launch it as a conversion podcast and you're putting it in front of your absolute ideal customer persona and they're not asking you about it at the end of the podcast, well, you got to tweak something, right?
That's right.
It's either the solution that you're providing isn't relevant enough, it's not an urgent pain, it's not sexy enough, or it doesn't make any sense, right? There's a lot of reasons why it doesn't work. But once you find that it does work, those signals are irrefutable, meaning you won't get people to stop asking you about it, or you will have more leads that you can handle when you run ads to it. And so that's really the genesis and the purpose of a power offer is, how do I get demand? How do I frame this in a way that tells me, am I off with this target market? Am I off with this offer? Or is this something that people really want?
And one other component and variable to that, and that's almost word for word the way that I explain, like the feedback loop that you create.
Yep.
If you drop an anchor offer or power offer and somebody doesn't ask you about it, it's either one of those things that you just mentioned, basically your offer needs to be better, or you are not talking to the right person.
Yep.
It's one of those two things, right? And so you're getting down again to a binary decision. If I run this podcast, I drop this offer and my client doesn't ask me about it, either I need a better offer or I need more specific targeting on who I'm bringing into the podcast. It's one of the two. Now, the art part of it is you got to figure out which one it is.
Yep.
And the good thing about the conversion podcast is if you do a 12, 30, 45 minute, however long it is, that is the length of your feedback loop with your target market. If you're bringing on your ideal client as a guest, and you drop an offer and they don't ask you about it, you can change it before the next episode. See if that little tweak works. I've changed my anchor offer a dozen times, maybe more. I've changed products. I've changed positioning. I've tried putting like a shocking stat up front. I've tried asking a question. I've tried all of the things, and it's continuously evolving. And that's the thing, like, you don't have to get it right. You just have to get it close and then let the market tell you what they want. And I'll add one more thing here.
Yeah.
When Joel was giving his description of a power offer, I'm a purist and a loyalist. Like if somebody says write these things, I'm gonna write them exactly like you said. I've spent my whole life just trying to be compliant, but you don't have to write a power offer exactly as, if I did this without paying XYZ, would you be interested? It doesn't have to fit that rigid format exactly. So let me read you my current anchor offer for one of
Yep.
it's the podcast is called The Do Zone. It is a podcast that I have over 250 episodes. It's about productivity for entrepreneurs. And this is how I position the offer. It's at the very beginning. I introduce the podcast, I introduce myself, and then I say the Do Zone is sponsored by Fast Track Funnels, the new way to bring in consistent daily sales for your business in 2025 without cold outreach or burning cash on ads. We use this method with a brand new business to generate more than $100,000 cash collected in less than 30 days. Download the free step-by-step blueprint that shows you exactly how we did it at getconversions.net. That's my offer. And you see those same components are there. I'm getting your attention. I'm telling you what you get, the pains that you're avoiding. And then I'm backing myself with some authority by saying, yeah, I actually did this stuff. I'm not just making it up. Here's where to go next.
And all you really need to do is you really just got to hit on like one or two of the elements. Like one or two of the elements has to nail what your target customer really wants. That will cause them to be like, hey, you mentioned something earlier on, because they're not going to remember the entire ad, right? Yeah. Or the anchor offer, the power offer. Say, hey, you mentioned something earlier on. Tell me a little bit more about what that is, right? And that's all you're trying to do. That's all you're trying to do. If you don't get those questions, you know that you're completely off. Like you've whiffed, swung and a miss, and that's totally fine. And what I tell people is that's the most important feedback you can get in business is a no or crickets, because you know without a shadow of a doubt something's off here, right? Mm-hmm. So what are the biggest mistakes people make when they launch these podcasts, these conversion podcasts?
The biggest mistake that most people make is thinking that it's this big grand production that they have to go and buy all this fancy gear and, do all this research and prep and stuff. But like all you really need to do is come up with a title that is going to appeal to the identity and status of your ideal client. Identity is I am. Status is I did. So as an example, if I like to use the example of a dentist with, we use two waypoints, dentist, and then one other thing. So dentist with multiple offices, because those guys, like they all have a very specific set of problems that like a sole practitioner wouldn't necessarily deal with. So have it be at least two things. So let's say dentist with multiple offices. Appeal to their identity by saying, dental empire builder. And that's something they can say, I am a dental empire builder. That's an identity play. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you can do is you can say 7-figure dental empire builder, which is appealing also to their status. I did build a 7-figure dental empire. And so we want to bring the right people in. So come up with a title that appeals to identity and status, and say, hey, I'm starting a podcast. It's called this. It's for these kinds of people. Who wants to be one of my first guests? Get these guys on a Zoom call, mash record, start talking to them, record 5 or 10 episodes and just like make all the mistakes and publish them. Just go ahead. It's fine. And then from there, start your refining. Because if you can record 10 episodes, you have shot past 90+% of all people in the history of podcasts who have ever started a podcast, because most people don't get past 7 episodes.
Yep. I love it, man. I love it. I'm going to be following this framework for Inspired, our software platform that's meant to bridge the gap of market intelligence meets endless creativity. And so I'm working on my power offer, my anchor offer, and I'm going to be interviewing ad agencies and marketers that are running ads to get their feedback on the software. It'll be interesting because we're also doing cold emailing. We tested a little bit of paid ads as well, but our messaging was off. But I like this as an organic approach to get that market feedback and say, hey, I'm really interested in this, or hey, tell me more, what's going on here. So how do you handle it? We'll wrap up after this, but when you're booking like 100 podcasts back to back, how do you handle it when someone says, hey, I want to learn more? Like, do you book a follow-up call? Like, in my opinion, I'd like to handle it right there. But if I book a follow-up call, is that like, do you typically see the sales temperature go down when they have to book a separate follow-up call to talk about that, or no?
Yeah, good question. So if you've got the time after the show to convert them into a client, great. I actually prefer to break it up because it changes the vibe. Like, you came on here to do a podcast, and I want to give you that. And if it turns into a sales opportunity, I almost want to say, like, all right, great.
Yeah.
But let's make this a substantial relation. I want to respect the space that we held for this, and let's start a conversation about working together at another time. Like, yeah, you know what? I got another call coming in.
Yeah.
Is it okay if we just book another call on the back end? And that way we have more time and then we can dive deeper.
For sure.
And
separate the frame and context.
Yeah. And that's another way that you can just make sure that there's no risk of that feeling like bait and switch kind of thing happening there. But if they're like, man, you're awesome, I want to do business with you, take the credit card. It's like, there's no rule against it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. This has been a lot of fun. And I really hope it opens your eyes to where else you can use this power offer. Think about it as your own personal ad. And a podcast is a great way to build your authority, build your credibility, have meaningful conversations with your ideal customer persona while also placing an ad in front of them. Like, it was kind of the biggest aha moment for me. Like, I never did any ad reads for any of my podcasts. And it's like, why not? And why not do an ad just for myself, And so anyway.
Yeah. And the last thing that I'll say here is it's a great playground for testing new ideas. So if you're running ads and those ads are converting, awesome. But if you have a new idea that you want to test out and you don't necessarily want to burn a bunch of cash on your ads, then that's where, if you've got a podcast, it's a good organic slow burn. Your next 3, 4, 5 guests, throw something in front of them and see what sticks. And then if it does, put it into your ads.
Can you remind us one last time, what does the outreach script look like? Like, if we're trying to get people to be our ideal customers, to be interested in being on our podcast, what are some sample scripts? I meant to ask you this earlier, and I know you dropped one earlier about the dentist.
Yeah. So, and this is something, thanks for bringing that up. Like, you guys, anybody that's watching this now, you can literally go do this right now. You don't have to do any other work. Go do this right now. Find a group or a community or reach out to your warm network. Let's try to specifically look for a place where your ideal clients would be hanging out already and socializing, and just write something along these lines. Hey, I'm starting a new podcast called X that appeals to identity and status of your ideal client. Or if you don't even want to do that, hey, I'm starting a new podcast for ideal client. I'm looking for my initial guests. Is anybody interested in coming on? I had one of my customers did that, and we happened to be connected, and I saw the post, and within 24 hours, he had 74 comments.
Yeah.
People that wanted to be on his podcast, and it was just like, it didn't even exist yet. Right? Like, you could literally go do this right now, and they will line up to join you. Now, all you have to do at that point is you got to do a good job and take care of them. But the right people are very motivated and interested in coming and talking to you and getting a spotlight shown on them.
And what's the benefit of them going on the show? Like, is it just, I'm hosting a show, would you like to be on it? Is it that simple? Or does it need to be what's in it for them? Or is it just implied because there's a podcast?
Great question. And so I see a lot of trends because I talk to a lot of people about their podcasts, and I get the question a lot, what's in it for the guest? Why would a guest want to come onto my show? But the guests don't ask that. They don't ask that question. The host asks that question, like, why would somebody want to hang out and talk to me? Well, they want to come and talk to you because they want to be on a podcast.
Yep.
The amount of people who want to be guests on a podcast versus the people who have podcasts to be guests on is like 10-1 outnumbered. If you have a podcast, you are the hot girl at the party.
Love it. All right. Well, hopefully this was valuable for you. If you want to learn more about the Power Offer, head to thepowerofferworkshop.com. Josh, where do we learn about conversion podcasts?
Yep. You can go to conversationalfunnels.com/podcourse. That's one word, podcourse. Conversationalfunnels.com.
Why do you not have conversionfunnels.com or conversionpodcast.com? Is it taken?
It's taken. If anybody has a connection, let me know. But yeah, it's totally taken.
So don't go to that URL.
Don't go there.
I should rebrand it.
Yeah.
Anyway, you get the idea. This was an awesome chat, Josh. I appreciate it, man. And everyone else, take care.